It was late autumn, 1944, and the forests of France were thick with mist, smoke, and the lingering echoes of distant gunfire. When Corporal James "Jimmy" Reynolds and his platoon found themselves isolated deep behind enemy lines, cut off from the main advance, and from any hope of immediate reinforcements, the mission had been simple on paper: secure a strategic ridge, hold it until the rest of the company arrived. But as the morning fog lifted, the reality of war revealed itself. Supply lines were severed, communications were down, and the enemy had surrounded them almost completely. His commanding officer lay wounded, leaning against a tree, blood staining his uniform, giving brief, panicked orders that barely carried through the howling wind and the crackle of distant artillery. Jimmy glanced at the faces of the young men around him, some trembling, some staring blankly, some whispering prayers, and felt the weight of a responsibility far heavier than his years. Every second was measured, not by the ticking of a watch, but by the thump of approaching enemy boots, the faint shimmer of gun barrels through the foliage, and the distant rumbles of tanks on the muddy roads beyond, with no one left to lead decisively. Jimmy made a choice that would define not only his life, but the fate of the entire platoon. He took command, slowly, carefully. He scanned the forest, noting every shadow, every movement, wondering which direction the enemy would strike first, and how many men might fall before dawn. He whispered instructions to his closest comrades, each word weighed with tension, every pause a chance for disaster. Through the fog, a distant crack, a twig snapping, set hearts racing, and Jimmy froze, motioning for silence, listening intently, counting seconds as if each one could be their last. Shadows shifted between trees, and he questioned whether it was a scout or a trap. He plotted routes, improvised defenses, and tested his men's nerves with sudden, quiet movements to keep them alert. A flurry of distant gunfire drew their attention, and he had to decide: engage or wait. The rain began to fall lightly, masking footsteps, but also adding the threat of slipping into enemy fire. He moved silently, checking every corner, whispering encouragement, daring his men to trust him. Each time a figure appeared through the mist, tension spiked. Could it be a friend or an enemy disguised? Every creaking branch, every distant shout turned into a puzzle, a test of instinct, courage, and judgment. Jimmy's mind raced, calculating odds, predicting enemy maneuvers, while the platoon watched him, waiting for guidance, praying silently that his choices would save them all. As night approached, the forest grew darker, denser, and every sound became amplified, a constant reminder that one wrong move could end everything. Yet, through the fear and the uncertainty, Jimmy remained calm, his courage radiating, binding the men together, holding them steady while the invisible threat drew closer with every heartbeat, slowly, carefully. He organized the men into a defensive perimeter, assigning positions, instructing them to use the terrain to their advantage, and improvising signals with whatever materials they had. A whistle, a flashlight, even colored cloth tied to branches, to communicate silently under constant threat. The hours stretched like days, the forest a living trap that could close in at any moment. Enemy patrols slipped through the undergrowth, and at one point, Jimmy had to crawl into open ground to drag a wounded soldier to safety. Every movement measured, every heartbeat loud in his ears, knowing that one misstep could be fatal. As night fell, the platoon huddled in shallow foxholes, listening to the distant crackle of gunfire and the ominous hum of engines, debating whether to stay and fight or risk a perilous escape through unfamiliar terrain. Jimmy chose to stay. He knew that fleeing could scatter his men, leave them vulnerable, and guarantee their deaths. Whereas holding their position, no matter how desperate, gave them at least a chance. He moved through the line repeatedly, offering quiet encouragement, adjusting positions, sometimes putting himself directly in danger to demonstrate courage. Each action a silent lesson in leadership. Dawn revealed the devastation wrought overnight. Trees shredded, mud churned with footprints, the ground scarred by mortar shells. Yet Jimmy's platoon had survived, cohesive and alive. But the enemy wasn't finished. Intelligence suggested a flanking maneuver, faster and deadlier than any they had yet encountered. Jimmy had to anticipate the impossible, predict enemy movements, ration dwindling ammunition, and maintain morale as exhaustion and fear gnawed at every man. He devised a daring plan, a series of controlled retreats, interspersed with ambushes. Using the natural rise and fall of the land, fallen logs, and shallow trenches to his advantage. Each engagement was tense, measured, a high-stakes chess game, with human lives as the pieces. Time and again, Jimmy put himself between the enemy and his men, drawing fire, distracting, buying them seconds they could not afford to lose. As night fell once more, a storm rolled in. Rain-soaking uniforms, turning the forest floor into a treacherous mix of mud and leaves. Visibility was low. The wind howled, and every sound, a snapping twig, a distant shout, could be the signal of approaching death. Yet through it all, Jimmy moved steadily, calmly. His presence alone a steadying force for the young soldiers around him. When the first reinforcements arrived, hours later than expected, it was thanks to Jimmy's relentless vigilance, clever strategy, and unwavering courage that the platoon was intact, battered, mud-streaked, terrified, but alive. Every soldier owed their life to the young corporal who refused to let fear dictate action, who weighed each decision with moral clarity and tactical precision, and who understood that true bravery often meant risking everything, knowing that the margin between survival and death was infinitesimally thin. In the aftermath, there were no parades, no headlines, no medals awarded immediately. History, in its rush to move forward, almost forgot Jimmy Reynolds and the quiet heroism he embodied. But those who survived carried the story in their hearts, a testament to leadership, courage, and the human spirit under fire. Decades later, historians piecing together battlefield reports, letters, and memoirs would finally give recognition to the man who had turned a desperate situation into a story of survival, proving that sometimes one person's courage is enough to save dozens, and that heroism often resides in moments the world never witnesses directly. Even now, most Americans have never heard his name. Yet the legacy of Jimmy Reynolds reminds us that amidst the chaos and horror of war, the bravery of a single soldier can shape the fate of many, and that history often hides its greatest heroes in the shadows of ordinary deeds, performed under extraordinary pressure.